This happened in September 2022, and I still can't explain it. My friends Tyler and Jenna had been planning this camping trip for months. Just the three of us, deep in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in southern Washington. No cell service, no people, just trees and silence. We hiked in 4 miles from the nearest trailhead and set up camp in a clearing Tyler had found online. Completely isolated, surrounded by massive Douglas firs, with a creek running along one side. We built a fire, cooked dinner, and went to bed around 10:30. The temperature had dropped to maybe 40 degrees, and a thin mist had started rolling through the trees. I fell asleep almost immediately. I don't know what time it was when I first heard the footsteps. At first, I thought it was part of a dream. A slow, heavy thud. Thud. Thud somewhere outside the tent. I opened my eyes. The sound was real. Footsteps, walking around the campsite. I lay there in my sleeping bag, perfectly still, listening. The steps were moving slowly, deliberate. They circled from the left side of my tent, around the back, then toward the front. My first thought was that it was Tyler or Jenna, maybe going to the bathroom. But then I heard the footsteps pass their tent too. They were circling the entire clearing, around both tents, around the fire pit. I checked my phone. 1:14 a.m. The footsteps stopped. Maybe 30 seconds of silence. Then they started again, closer this time. Right outside my tent. Thud, pause, thud, pause, slow, methodical. Like whoever it was wanted me to hear them. I heard Tyler's tent unzip. What the hell? His voice was tense. Did you hear that? Yeah, Jenna whispered. Stay inside. Hey, who's out there? Tyler shouted. Silence. Then the footsteps moved away, faster now, toward the tree line. I finally unzipped my tent. Tyler was standing outside in boxers and a hoodie, holding a flashlight. Jenna was wrapped in a blanket behind him. Someone was just walking around our camp, Jenna said quietly. Just walking in circles. Tyler swept his flashlight across the clearing. Nothing. We stood there listening. The forest was completely silent except for the creek. Let's just go back to sleep, Jenna said. Maybe it was a hiker. At 1 a.m, I said. We went back to our tents, but I didn't sleep. Around 2 a.m, the footsteps started again. Same pattern. Slow circles around the campsite. Tyler unzipped his tent and shouted, "This isn't funny. Leave!" The footsteps stopped. And then from somewhere in the trees, maybe 50 feet away, we heard a voice. Low, barely audible. It said, "I know," Jenna screamed. We didn't go back to our tents. The three of us huddled by the dead fire pit, backs to each other, flashlights pointed everywhere. We stayed like that until sunrise. When the light came up around 6 a.m, Tyler said, "I'm going to look around." "Don't," Jenna said. "Let's just leave. I need to see." I went with him. We walked around the campsite, scanning the ground, and then Tyler stopped. "Oh my God." Footprints, bare human footprints. They formed a complete circle around both of our tents, dozens of them overlapping, like someone had walked the same path over and over. But the prints didn't lead into the campsite. And they didn't lead out. They just started at one point and ended about 20 feet away, right at the tree line. Like whoever it was had just vanished. "We need to leave," Jenna said. "Right now." We packed up in 20 minutes and hiked out. Tyler called the ranger station from the parking lot. They said they'd checked the area but didn't seem concerned. We drove back to Seattle in silence. A few weeks later, I was looking through photos from the trip. There was one I didn't remember taking. Time-stamped 1:32 a.m. The image was dark and blurry, just the inside of my tent. But in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was the silhouette of someone standing outside. pressed against the tent wall, and I never opened my camera that night. The man at the abandoned ranger station. This happened last October when my brother Danny and I went camping in the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Danny had just gotten out of a bad breakup and needed to clear his head, so we drove down from Pittsburgh on a Friday afternoon. Found a spot about 2 miles off the main trail. Quiet, isolated, exactly what we were looking for. What we didn't expect was the ranger station. We came across it around 4 p.m. while setting up camp. It was maybe 100 yards from our site, half hidden by overgrown brush and pine trees. Small wooden building, maybe 20 by 20 feet, with a covered porch and shuttered windows. It looked abandoned. The wood was weathered gray, the roof sagging in places. There was a rusted chain wrapped around the door handles with an old padlock. "Creepy," Danny said. "Probably been empty for years," I replied. We went back to camp, built a fire, cooked some chili. By 9 p.m. it was completely dark and cold enough to see our breath. We sat by the fire talking until around 11, then headed to our tents. I was just starting to drift off when Danny unzipped my tent. "Dude," he whispered, "look." I crawled out and followed his gaze toward the ranger station. There was a light inside, faint and yellow like from an old lantern glowing through the cracks in the shutters. "That wasn't there before," Danny said quietly. We stood there watching. The light didn't move, didn't flicker, just stayed constant. "Maybe a ranger is staying there," I said. "The door was chained shut," Danny said. "We saw it. Maybe there's a back entrance." We watched for another few minutes. Then we heard it. Footsteps, heavy boots on a wooden floor, walking back and forth inside the building, slow, steady pacing. My stomach tightened. "Someone's in there," Danny whispered. The pacing continued for maybe 5 minutes, back and forth, back and forth. Then it stopped. The light stayed on. "Should we go check?" Danny asked. "No," I said immediately. "It's almost midnight. If someone's staying there, let them be." We went back to our tents, but I barely slept. I kept thinking about that light, those footsteps. Around 3 a.m. I heard them again. The same slow pacing inside the ranger station, back and forth, back and forth. I looked out through my tent's mesh window. The lantern light was still glowing. I watched until the pacing stopped again, maybe 10 minutes later. The light went out. I finally fell asleep around 4 a.m. When I woke up, the sun was just starting to rise. Danny was already up, standing near the fire pit, staring at the ranger station. "I want to go look," he said when I walked over. "Now?" "Yeah, in daylight, I need to know." We walked over together. The building looked even more decrepit in the morning light. The windows were covered in grime. Some of the boards were rotting, and the porch steps creaked under our weight. The chain was still there, wrapped around the door handles, locked with the same rusted padlock, covered in dust and spider webs. Danny pulled on it. "This hasn't been opened in years." I peered through a gap in the shutters. Inside was dark, but I could make out an old desk, some filing cabinets, and a layer of dust covering everything. No lantern, no signs of anyone being inside recently. "Maybe we imagined it," I said, but I didn't believe that. Danny walked around the building, checking for other entrances. There was a back door, but it was boarded up from the outside. Nails rusted solid. "There's no way anyone was inside," he said. We were about to head back to camp when I saw them. Boot prints, fresh ones, pressed into the damp dirt near the front porch. They led from the base of the steps directly toward our campsite. Danny saw them too. "What the hell?" We followed the prints. They were clear, deliberate. Someone wearing heavy boots, walking with purpose. They went straight through the woods, past the trees, and stopped about 20 feet from our tents. Just stopped. Like whoever it was had stood there watching us sleep and then turned around and walked back. But there were no return prints. "This doesn't make sense," Danny said, his voice shaking. "The door was chained. No one was inside, but someone walked from there to here." I didn't have an answer. We packed up our stuff in 15 minutes, didn't talk, didn't eat breakfast, just loaded our packs and started hiking back to the car. The entire hike out, I kept looking over my shoulder. When we got home, Danny looked up the ranger station online. Found an old forestry article from the 1990s. The station had been abandoned since 1987. A ranger named Thomas Milliken had been stationed there alone. One winter during a bad snowstorm, he radioed for help, saying someone was outside the building, trying to get in. They found him 3 days later, frozen to death on the floor inside. The door had been chained from the outside. They never figured out how he got locked in, or who he'd been radioing about. The missing voice recorder. I've been camping alone for years. Never had a problem, never felt unsafe. But after what happened in the Uwharrie National Forest last March, I don't think I'll ever go back. I'm a sound designer for indie films, and I'd driven down to North Carolina specifically to record ambient forest sounds. Wind, birds, rustling leaves, that kind of thing. I had my small handheld voice recorder, a Zoom H4n, and I'd planned to leave it running overnight to capture the nighttime atmosphere. I set up camp on a Thursday afternoon about 3 miles from the nearest trailhead. It was early March, still cold at night, but the weather was clear. Perfect conditions. Around 8 p.m. after I'd eaten dinner and built a small fire, I set up the recorder on a fallen log about 10 feet from my tent, hit record, checked the levels, and let it run. The battery could go for about 12 hours, so I figured I'd have plenty of material by morning. I went to bed around 10 p.m. I woke up at 6:30 a.m. to sunlight filtering through my tent. First thing I did was crawl out to check the recorder. It wasn't there, the log was empty. I looked around, thinking maybe an animal had knocked it over or I'd misremembered where I put it. But it was gone. My stomach dropped. That recorder cost me $400, and it had all my work from the previous 2 days on it. I searched the entire campsite, checked under leaves, around trees, inside my tent, thinking maybe I'd brought it in and forgotten. Nothing. Then I started walking in circles, expanding my search radius. I found it about 20 minutes later, maybe 200 meters away from camp, sitting upright on a flat rock in the middle of a small clearing I'd never been to, just sitting there, perfectly placed. The record light was still on. My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The battery was almost dead, down to about 5%. I turned it off and carried it back to camp. I didn't listen to it right away. I was too rattled. How did it get out there? Animals don't carry things and set them down carefully on rocks, and no one else was out here. I would have heard them. After I made coffee and packed up most of my gear, I finally worked up the nerve to plug in my headphones and play back the recording. The first few hours were normal. Crickets, distant owls, wind through the trees. Around 11 p.m., I could hear myself snoring faintly in the background. The mic had picked it up from inside my tent. Then, at 1:43 a.m., there was a sound. Footsteps, slow, crunching on leaves and twigs, getting closer to the recorder. They stopped right next to it. Silence for about 30 seconds. Then the footsteps moved away. I felt sick listening to it. Someone had been at my campsite in the middle of the night, standing right next to where I was sleeping. At 2:18 a.m., The footsteps came back, closer this time. I could hear breathing, slow, steady, deliberate. Then a sound like fabric brushing against the mic, like someone was picking it up. The audio changed. Background noise became muffled, distant. Whoever had taken it was carrying it. I could hear footsteps now, from the perspective of the recorder, being carried through the forest. Branches snapping, leaves crunching. The person wasn't running, just walking. Slowly. This went on for maybe 10 minutes. Then the footsteps stopped. A soft thunk as the recorder was set down on something hard. The rock, I realized. More silence, and then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I heard it. A whisper, right next to the mic. So close I could hear the breath behind the words. A man's voice. It said, "You shouldn't be here." I ripped the headphones off. My heart was pounding. I sat there staring at the recorder in my hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. Someone had walked into my camp while I was sleeping, taken my recorder, carried it 200 meters into the forest, set it down, and whispered into it. Why? I didn't pack up the rest of my stuff. I just grabbed my essentials, left the tent, and started hiking back to my car. I practically ran the entire 3 miles. When I got to the trailhead, I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to calm down. Then I called the ranger station and told them everything. They said they'd send someone to check the area but didn't sound particularly concerned. Probably thought I'd imagined it or made it up. I drove home that afternoon, and the first thing I did was back up the audio file to my computer. I listened to the whole thing again, hoping I'd misheard. That maybe it was just wind or an animal sound that I'd misinterpreted. But no, it was clear. You shouldn't be here. I sent a copy to a friend of mine who does audio forensic work, asked him to analyze it, see if he could tell me anything about the voice, age, accent, anything. He called me 2 days later. "This is weird," he said. "I ran it through some filters, isolated the frequencies. The voice is real. It's definitely human. But there's something else." "What?" "There's a second layer of sound underneath the whisper, really faint, almost imperceptible. It sounds like it's the same words, but reversed." "What do you mean, reversed?" "I mean someone recorded that phrase, played it backwards, and layered it under the original whisper. I don't know why someone would do that, but it's there." I didn't know what to say. "And one more thing," he added. I checked the metadata on the file. The recorder's internal clock shows that section of audio, the whisper, was recorded at 3:17 a.m. on March 9th. "Yeah, I know," I said. "That's when I heard it." "But the file properties show it was created on March 6th. I felt cold. "That's 3 days before you even went camping." "I haven't been able to explain it. I've tried. Maybe someone tampered with the file. Maybe there's a glitch in the metadata. Maybe my friend made a mistake. But I listened to that whisper 100 times, and I know what I heard. Someone was out there. Someone who knew I was coming.